Hello, welcome to Friday night's video in our second master series. This, I do believe, is the 39th video in our second master series. And if I'm not mistaken, that this is the 6th video dealing with impulse and frequency response analysis and metering. This is a really tough subject, so this is going to basically be my final video on this short segment because this really is going to entail you doing some research. There's a lot of videos on my channel for looking at acoustics, the science of sound, and all kinds of interrelated concepts, technologies that are really, direction in helping you study this, because this whole topic is huge. And in my series, my first master series, at the beginning of it, there was a couple of videos, a master series, the first master series, number 3 and number 4, that are really going to be very helpful for you to really kind of take a look at that and some ways of dealing with it to help you get started with it. There's a bunch of videos on that master series also about mixing concepts, processing concepts, and all kinds of things that, with the understanding of this, that can really help you start to evaluate how big of an impact this subject has in the studio. And the understanding of being precautionary is a lot of times a lot better idea than trying to deal with problems after you already have problems, in your production and printed on your audio. And it's a huge topic. First of all, you have the topic of your room itself. You have the topic of your equipment, causing and affecting your impulse and frequency responses of what's, as it goes through your system in the signal flow path. And once it's inside of your studio or inside of your DAW, that, what your plugins might even do to it, what processing might do it, what my editing might do to it, and to keep it in mind so that as you starting to become this next level, quote unquote, master audio engineer, that, as that starts to sink in, that you really start digging into that a little bit to really understand what's going on in there, so you try to minimize any detrimental effects at anywhere during the production and at every phase and at any point in your signal flow chain to try to get that done. And it's not all just about, capturing, so your room and your microphone, but it's also about your room and your speakers and, things that it's going to interpret things and, recalculate things. And as it's putting out sound that's going to affect your decisions while you're working on the project also. So all these areas in all phases, you really need to sit down and just understand, the biggest hurdle for you is to understand what a major impact this whole subject can have on your production, and to really sit down and start thinking about, what does that mean? And how can I deal with that? How can I take precautionary measures to stop that from happening? So that I don't have to deal with these issues throughout my production. A simple concept is something very simple, is that I record this guy in a room, and, this is just one example of the hundreds. But I record this guy in a room, and the room doesn't sound that good. Not only is it affecting the impulse response, it's having effect on the sound, but the frequency response as well. Now, it may not be really bad, but between it and maybe not a really good microphone and that by the time I've got this printed track and I start trying to, work the equalization and work, reverberations and spatialization techniques like we talked about, mixing techniques, in the first master series, and processing, all these things start to fight with each other with that track that isn't done really well. And you can get away with a pretty inexpensive microphone, but, if you record something in a bathroom, and that's an extreme example, that frequency impulse response content that's affecting what you've imprinted can have a really detrimental effect later on that you might not be able to get out of there without really spending a lot of time with something like RX6 or something like that. Or you really know, I mean, how do you do some really wild equalization work that, you're going to have some issues of trying to make that come out sound really good. So, I mean, a lot of it can be really precautionary. And when you're dealing with any equipment that you understand this concept, most of the time, any equipment that I'm dealing with, I'm trying to make sure it's got as flat a frequency response as possible so that's not affecting it with the frequency at all. And if it's causing any kind of delays or echoing or anything like that, some kind of plug-in or anything else in the system in the signal flow, I'm careful of it. And as far as the room, I'm isolating the performer as best I can to where I don't have these effects to have to deal with. And a lot of times it can be that simple. A lot of times it's really simple precautionary things and just thinking about it before you throw a plug in on and start doing stuff, what that's going to do, and simple concept of like, some reverb plug-in might actually be affecting the track. It's frequency content, it's adding low end or something. And on top of it, that you add two different types of reverb to two different tracks, that they'll be fighting with each other. We talked about using the same type of reverberation throughout a production on every track so they don't fight with each other. The spaces don't fight with each other. They may sound good, on by themselves, but when you start mixing them together, those impulse frequency responses start conflicting with each other sometimes and start causing a muddy mess. There's another really simple example just to understand that the subject runs really deep and it's something you really need to think about where all it might be affecting your production from the very beginning to the very end and everywhere in between. Is it causing an issue? Could that piece of equipment or what I'm doing be affecting that in some way, and to start analyzing that. Now, when we start looking at effects plugins, we will look at reverberation plugins and things like that, and we'll take a look and analyze that. When we get to that and when we get to equalization, those plugins, and we're analyzing those basic processors, that you'll be able to apply a lot of that information to this short segment to help you analyze what's going on. I was going to make a bunch of videos here in this short segment, but I decided not to, and to show you kind of what's going on there, and then you can come back here and to help you go back and start analyzing those issues better with a better informed point of view and knowledgeable standpoint to help you evaluate where you may be having issues, and when you have issues, how to analyze those and evaluate them, from, more informed perspective. So I really hope you enjoyed this short segment, and as much as we talked about it, it's just something that you really need to kind of dig into a little bit. And this subject can be a huge problem for a lot of people because, you start getting into acoustics a little bit deeper. It's because of how widespread the problem can be throughout your entire production and system, that it can be some complicated things going on. And, you trying to look at things, getting some software to help you analyze room acoustics, starting to understand that a little bit better, and spending some time to understand the subject better so that when it's affecting your production in any way, shape, or form, that you may not be a NASA grade acoustician, but you have enough, foundational knowledge about the subject so that you can deal with it, where you need to while you're doing a music production. But just keep in mind, most of the time that the subject is a problem, and it's, precautionary things you need to do that are going to have the biggest impact on your production, and keeping an eye out as things go through your signal flow chain, all the way to the point where it's coming out the speakers and you're listening to it and mixing, that making sure that everything it's going through the signal flow chain and nothing's causing issues with it anywhere there, or it's not causing any issues that you can't counteract with counteractive measures, being audio engineer. But we will work on that more and more and more as we go through this series, and we talk more and more about effects and plugins that are directly related to things that might be happening in your system, in your signal flow chain, that can help you evaluate those things, whether or not they are causing an issue. So peace, self-love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this short segment when we're talking about impulse and frequency responses and metering them and analyzing them. And I hope you understand that it was more put together as part of this to really drill home how big of an issue it is, and that I can make a whole series on this issue all by itself, and I might later. But if you dig around on my channel, you should be able to find a lot of information to really help you start digging into it, and to help you understand the subject a little bit better, rather than me making tons of videos to dig really deep into it. That it's the basic concepts you really need to understand that where it might be affecting your production, and to evaluate whether it is or not, rather than sitting around with an oscilloscope and and a spectrometer going, there's one little teeny thing right there, that's affecting my whole production. It might, but it's really doubtful, unless it's a major problem that you can probably counteract it. And if you do a really good job as an engineer, it probably is not going to destroy your production unless it's a huge problem. But that, hopefully I've given you enough information to really consider that, take that into consideration, think about it, and start evaluating your production and your system and your environment so that you can make some good decisions about this issue. Peace, self-love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this short segment, and I will see you in the next video.